So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. I would like to thank you, Craig Leclerc, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, to give us the opportunity to speak today about artificial intelligence and software automation. Specifically, we are going to go deeply in the meaning of trust in the banking sector in this kind of automated environment. So thanks to all of you. With me there is Carmina Oletta, Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer at InfoCert. So we will have just 2 minutes of the positioning of InfoCert after we give the floor to Craig Leclerc, and at the end we will have a session with Carmina Oletta about all the evolution of trust in this environment. So, as InfoCert, we are building the European champion of trust. We think that when we spoke about trust, we are speaking about sensitive information, because usually we are managing contracts, invoicing, digital identity. So we believe that there's a need for a European player for trust with some features, as all the data centers located in Europe under the GDPR and EIDAS umbrella, with institutional root, with the capability of cross-border delivery. So our strategy is to building a pool to provide trust services all over Europe. At the moment, our facts and figures are growing in the recent few years. Now, at the moment, we have 9 offices all over Europe, 1 in Latam, 500 employees, and we reach 90 million of turnover. As a group, we are investing a lot on innovation, because we think that trust service is not just a matter of mandatory services and solution, but is an opportunity to create value for our customers, for our business, and innovate the way we perform our business. It's for this that on top of the trust service building block, we are building a lot of innovation that bring us to register 70 patents at the moment. When we speak about trust services, we are in the domain of EIDAS regulation that define the role of a QTSP, Qualified Trust Service Provider. What are the benefits moving in on this regulation? Is the fact that there are different pillars that we provide as services that are around the trusted identification. So we build a trusted digital identity. We manage all the customer authentication, so we can be sure about the fact that we are dealing and digitally transacting with someone. We collect the willingness to transact, so we can be sure about the transaction we are completing, and we can manage the, let me say, all the technology and channel that are enable this remote and digital transaction. At the end, we have to maintain this transaction for the long term. You can imagine about, I don't know, if we are speaking about a digital contract for a loan, it could be for years, or for patient's record, that is for all the life of the patient. So we have to maintain and preserve the validity of the transaction. At the very end, our role is to provide the full legal liability of the digital transaction. So a QTSP as InfoCert is not just a technology provider, is not just a software vendor. What we provide at the very end is the outsourcing of the liability of a digital procedure. So we can assure all the compliance and the legal value of a contract digitally signed, of an identification performed to a digital identity, and all the proof of evidence about communication notification that must be registered. So in all this case, we can externalize the risk and the liability to a QTSP like InfoCert. This is our positioning, and now we are discussing with Craig Clair about the evolution of this concept of trust in this environment of automation, especially with a focus on the financial sector. So, thank Craig, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to speak with everyone, and this is really can be summarized by the change that is going to affect trust due to automation. Automation is the new conversation. It is what everyone's talking about. It's driven by innovation in artificial intelligence. It's driven by practical application of technologies like robotic process automation. But basically, it's going to change the frameworks. It's going to change the regulations. It's going to change the technology that we currently deploy to manage trust. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start just with the forces of automation and talk just a tiny bit about what we mean by that. So, you know, AI has been gone through a number of phases over the years, over the decades. There's a term called AI winter, where AI is hyped to such an extent, and then it crashes in terms of meeting expectations, and it went through actually 2 of those periods. And now it's in a period of being talked about very extensively. But a couple things have changed that make this time could be different. One is that compute power has really accelerated to the point where you can actually process tremendous amounts of data and do it inexpensively, do it in cloud-based systems. So it's not so much that the algorithms have improved. The algorithms have been around for 50 years when the first paper was written on AI. It's really that we can now leverage unbelievable sets of data, and with the compute power we have, we can process them so that the machine can actually grow in intelligence. It can update variables in the data model that the algorithm is based on. And ultimately, and there's some evidence of that today, it can actually restructure the algorithms based on the data that's coming in. And that's really the promise of AI, of getting more intelligent over time. One of the confusions, though, is that AI is not one thing. It is a set of building blocks, which is what this slide shows. Some help you sense, image and video analysis. Facial recognition is becoming very, very important in trust. If you happen to go into an Amazon Go store, you'll see that facial recognition is what they use to authenticate an individual who can take anything off the shelf and just walk out the door. That's what they're depending on. Speech analytics, natural language processing, the ability to be understood, for a machine to understand human intent, whether it's Alexa or Cortana on our phone or Siri on our Apple phone, that's getting better all the time. And text analytics, which really takes a look at documents and unstructured data and makes sense of it. And we'll see why that's important in a minute. So the thinking part is the machine learning I talked about, and an acting part. So there are probably 15 to 20 different very specialized areas of AI that all can be mapped together and linked together to meet a particular use case. So what this really becomes is what Forrester believes there are 3 effects of all of this innovation in AI. And we call them our forces of automation. So one of them is scale, one is called convergence, and one is called control. Now, scale is just that in the past, for a business to grow, it really needed 3 things. It needed more land, it needed more money, more capital, and it needed more people. But with automation, as it's accelerating, there's a new formula for scale, and it involves use of cloud. It involves scaling with data rather than scaling with land. It is using algorithms to and data that's acquired perhaps for free to really grow value in the business. So companies like Facebook, like Google, the amount of revenue per employee for these new digitally scaled companies are off the charts. It's 1.5 million per employee of revenue generated. So scale has a different meaning in the world of automation. Now, convergence is where you're embedding digital intelligence in the physical world. So think of this as the Internet of Things. So you're converging the two worlds together, so making them much more intelligent. Now, a lot of the processes that exist in manufacturing, in running a utility, they're based, the regulatory frameworks, the monitoring capabilities are really based on the world that wasn't very digital, the physical world, which has been around us forever. But as you start to embed sensors and digital technology, you really need to look at how you're monitoring your capabilities, how you're complying with regulations in a very different way. So we think that there's going to be a trust capability that will develop for businesses that are moving rapidly into this converged world. And control is probably the biggest force that's going to affect trust in banking the most, because there are different aspects of control. The main thing is that in the old days of banking, a lot of humans made the decisions. So the business was very predictable, at least. You had humans in investment management, in providing loans, in handling transactions. A lot of the decisions were made by people. With the movement towards machine learning, which will reduce the cost of making those decisions by moving them into machines, you're going to see a shift of control from people to algorithms. The business will become more of a black box, where the black box has the algorithms that are making the decisions and really running the bank. This is a new world that we're just starting to understand, and it will require a different regulatory framework. It will require a different set of systems and processes. We'll have to be able to explain how a decision was made that may have been made based on deep learning, which is an area of AI that is the most opaque. Opaque meaning difficult to understand how a decision was made. So there's a whole market of trust that is developing now, and we see this at Forrester, that's really trying to build systems that can explain how decisions are made that use machine learning. So there's issues around trust, around compliance that will really change as decisions move to machines, more unpredictability, and of course we have to be always concerned with GDPR and the loss of data control. So those are a little bit on the forces of automation. Now, let's get to financial services. Now, one of the areas that's one of the building blocks of AI that's getting adapted around the world very rapidly is robotic process automation. So if you haven't heard about RPA, you need to go learn about it. This is a data that just came out in a Forrester report that shows the software market in green growing from almost nothing in 2017 to being a $4 billion market in 2023. This is software platforms that allow you to build software bots, invisible robots if you want, that will go and replace activity that may be done in a bank's back office. It may be done in a customer service environment at a financial institution. This is a very, very surging area. And that's evidenced by the top line of dark green that shows the growth in services companies that are deploying and implementing robotic process automation. So let me explain a little bit where that's happening geographically. Obviously, the US is often a big market, is a big market in general, but is very big in advanced automation and technology. But Europe is, as you see there, is adopting RPA very, very extensively. Latin America is not there yet, and the Middle East and other places, but India, because they have a lot of offshore labor that's doing low value work that can be easily robotized with RPA platforms, is showing quite a bit of growth in RPA. What that's doing is lowering the number of outsourced humans in offshore locations like India, where clients in the more developed countries are deciding to build on-premise software robots to replace a lot of that work in India. So very, very interesting market, very changing. And here's why it's growing. If you look at the return on investment for building a bot to do this type of work, just focus on the unattended target range. With a single bot that may cost 10,000 euros a year to maintain, you can take out the equivalent of 2 to 3.5 human beings. Yeah, so that's some very simple economics that are driving the market. And the key is that you can put in the bots without changing any of the back-end systems. So unlike a lot of process technologies that require lots of consultants, lots of modernization plans, redoing core systems, none of that with RPA. RPA is non-invasive because you're just mimicking the human fingers, the human clicks that are taking place, maybe dealing with 4 or 5 applications on a single desktop. You're building a bot to do that. So there's no change to back-end systems. I won't get into this much detail because I don't have that much time, but there is a slight difference between RPA that's used in call centers where the human is interacting with the bot and RPA that's used in the back office, which tends to be more of a server-based process. The biggest areas right now are finance and accounting, which is a shared service that every company has. But in the line of business area, that's really where in banking. So if you have I think I have a slide here. There's some major banks that have 1,500 people that just work in the closing of the books monthly and quarterly. 1,500 people. Now with RPA, they think they can replace about 400 of those in the next year. So these are relatively repetitive tasks that meet what we call the rule of 5, which is a very simple rule that if you have a small number of clicks and you access a small number of applications and you have a modest level of decisions, then you can build a bot to replace that human activity and make money. Just to make that clear, look at the 2 columns on the right. These are typical tasks that are done in every financial services company. And the human, let's take a look at collection reconciliation. That's only a 3-minute human process. You can build a bot to do that process. But look how many times a year it's done. It's done 145,000 times. So even though it's a small snippet of a task only taking 3 minutes, if it's repetitive enough in high enough transaction volume, it makes a lot of economic sense to build a bot to do it. This is what's driving the market. Now, all this automation is getting more intelligent. A lot of the bots in RPA are referred to as digital workers, meaning that they're essentially workers that are doing work that humans were doing, and they are digital, so they're digital workers. But the progression is to combine other AI elements to externalize the decision making to machine learning algorithms, to use text analytics, as in phase 2 here, stage 2, to basically summarize information from documents and create a tagged or a structured file that bots can work on. Bots need to have structured data. They cannot work directly on unstructured data. So natural language processing can be used to normalize the data set for the bots. That's where the investment is going in today, particularly in banks, looking at loan agreements. If you can find an error in a bank, in loan documents or loan forms coming in, maybe the potential client checked single here and married over here, and that's an error. You can have a bot find that process with a combination of RPA and text analytics and fix it right at the front end of the process without going into the back office. This is where you save a lot of dollars, in terms of efficiency. And ultimately, you'll incorporate and embed a lot of AI components in these digital workers. So that's kind of where it's going. When you look at financial services overall, all of these forces of automation, all of these robotics are going to change the way processes are done. When you do that, you have to change the way those processes are monitored, the way they're regulated, the amount of trust that is really embodied in those processes. So you see compliance and investigation here. These are the top use cases for investment of AI in financial services. And enterprise fraud management, EFM, compliance and investigation, that's a critical area. Applying AI to the engagement process, to the customer journey, looking at what channel the customer is interacting in and correlating the information with AI algorithms to understand what the customer is trying to do. That's a big area of investment. Virtual agents, virtual assistants. You see them now. Just about every bank has a text chat, a chat way of getting service. They're not very good yet, but they're getting better. Risk decisioning, decision management, all of these things. We have to be able to explain how a decision was made. And as you put in machine learning, it's not always clear that there's an easy way to do that. So there's definitely a lot of issues related to trust that we're going to have to deal with. So in my last couple slides here, trust affects the profitability, reputation, and compliance. You have losses due to fraud. You now have bots that are working in banks that have to be governed in a different way. These digital workers have human credentials. They're operating in the most trusted application areas that a bank has. So how do you ensure, other than having a life cycle view of the bot's activities, who developed the bot? When was the bot developed? Who does the bot report to? Who's responsible for the bot's credentials? These are all new areas of trust and compliance that we're just beginning to understand. All of this can affect your brand value and your customer loyalty. So it's beyond know your customer, anti-money laundering, identity management that InfoCert specializes in. There's another level of governance that's going to emerge as we move into these advanced areas. Fraudsters don't have to be compliant, but banks do. And they have to get it right all the time. It's not just stopping one entity. And we're behind. The omni-channel models we have now are behind, and they need to be restructured from a trust and management area. And many technologies are involved, and we'll hear about these in a few minutes. But all of these things create compliance issues and trust issues and can be improved. I mentioned we talked about robotic process automation, but how about document generation? How about contract lifecycle management? How about non-repudiation? How about authentication? Obviously important. Having a vetted electronic signature and signing process, and ultimately a trust services platform. So AI can help in a lot of this. On the one hand, it accelerates transactions and it improves customer experience, but with that comes an increased risk that we have to manage. But AI can really help. It's already helping in fraud management and AML solutions, but we have to see how it can help in other areas that we've talked about. Okay, I'm going to end here and turn it over. But thank you very much. Really enjoyed this, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks to providing us this inspiring view about the evolution of trust in this automated world, and especially in the financial sector. And now let me introduce you Carmine Aletta, the InfoCert Chief Innovation Officer, that will provide us a view from a qualified trust service provider on this evolution. Please, for all the attendees, if you have any question to submit to Claire, you can do this through the platform. So please write down your question. At the end, we will have a Q&A session. Thank you. Please, Carmine, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Marco, and thanks, Craig, for the inspiring speech. As a matter of fact, I mean, this is not a very nice time for the people who are in the banking sector. A lot of disruption is happening. Craig just explained how software is going to permeate every activity within a bank. I'm going to talk to you about other additional two trends that are affecting tremendously the banking sector. And at the end, we'll see what are the consequences of all this transformation in terms of trust. Let's start looking at how the bank ecosystem has worked up until now. Now, if you want, historically, banks used to be, let me, straightforward business. They have a direct interaction with their customers. And they tend to be a one-stop shop to supply all the customer needs. Now, it could be money transfer, a mortgage, investments, a classical vertical integrated business. In this world, from a trust secure standpoint, it was very easy to be secured because there was one point of connection, if you want, between the customer and the bank. And the model of trust was very traditional. In this area, InfoCert has been developing a wide variety of solutions to guarantee trust. Just as a reminder for all, what is trust when we talk about the digital world? Trust now, back to the basic, is to make sure that we can guarantee the identity of the parties taking part in the transactions. We can guarantee the integrity, authenticity, and confidentiality of all the data exchanged. And last but not least, we have a clear liability framework that needs to be used in case anything goes wrong. Well, we have developed over the years a platform that managed very effectively the interaction point between the bank and the client. InfoCert has been able to assist more than 100 financial institutions spread out around Europe in all their interaction with their customer, mainly in the onboarding phase, but also in every other transaction, with a platform that is able to guarantee all those aspects of trust in a multi-channel environment. So in live transaction and in a remote transaction with different means, using video ID, using self-ID, means using bots to guarantee the identity of the counterparts, and with some advanced identity proofing solution like electronic identification or anti-money laundering identification. Well, this is the world as it used to be, because this is changing, first of all, because of the regulation, if you want. What we used to regulate as a single point of interaction between the customer and the bank is changing, if you want, because of PSD2. What PSD2 is imposing to all the banks is to implement an open banking access, meaning that the bank has to be able to interact not directly with the customer, but with whatever TP or middleman or third-party provider, as they're called, that could act on behalf of the customer. And this is the first, if you want, unbundling that is happening in the process, because we are breaking the relationship with the customer, between the customer and the bank. The bank is not managing the client's need anymore, because they are going to be managed by an intermediary, the TPP. Means the bank doesn't have a direct connection with the customer, also in terms of security that this implies. And our trust chain is getting longer. I don't have two parties anymore in a transaction. I have at least three. I have the customer that is asking for a transaction to a TPP that is reversing that transaction to the financial institution. So we have a longer chain of trust that needs to be secured along the way. Again, the tools the technical tools that we use to guarantee the security in such transactions are still the same. No, we have to guarantee that the connection is secure. We have to guarantee the identification of counterparts, what the regulation calls strong customer authentication or SCA, data integrity, and a proper audit trail to keep the log of whatever is happening. If you want, the transaction chain is being stretched, but it's still linear because still we have a double hop to do what we're doing before with a single hop between the client and the bank. And to do all this, what is prescribed in the regulation are two basic tools to guarantee the security, authenticity, and non-repudiation of the transaction. They are called QUAC, which is pretty much a sort of SSL certificates to guarantee a secure channel in the transaction. A QSeal, which guarantees the identities of the counterpart that will need to seal all the data that they exchange in the transaction. So this is what's happening, if you want, from the external to the bank. But there is a huge change that is happening also within the bank itself. Is affecting the bank proper business processes. And this is coming because of the fintech revolution. Here are just a few of the unicorns, fintechs that are worth more than $1 billion out there, listed in CB Insight reports. You can see some of those fintechs today already are worth more than a traditional bank as we know it. Mention Stripe for payments, Cabbage for instant lending, TransferWise for money transfer, and so on. So what we see we are seeing a sort of horizontal approach of those companies. Instead of replicating what has been the traditional financial world, they tend to serve all the customer needs. So in a vertically integrated manner, fintech into B2B space, because those fintechs that we're looking at are all B2B focused. They are addressing a specific niche. So they are focusing to get one specific business process done in the best possible way, in the cheapest possible way, and the more convenient possible way for the client. This fintech ecosystem, so it can be classified according to the type of vertical specific activity they are going to provide. And what we see that banks more and more are going to partner with those fintech in order to be able to offer their services to their bank. So we have also a huge change we did inside the processes of the bank. Not only externally, we have what the regulation is forcing me to adopt, which is a variety of counterparts that can initiate a transaction. But internally, in order for the bank to cope with the fintech revolution and be able to offer to their client best-of-breed solution, they are partnering with the fintech ecosystem and use fintech services inside their own business processes. And this is having an even greater impact in terms of trust, because we go from what used to be a linear, an unbundled but linear relationship between the customer and the bank to a sort of patchwork, a mesh network where to provide a specific services, the bank can rely on a variety of supplier, of fintech player or service provider, and those will need to interact one with the other, and we have to be able to guarantee the trust of all the data that in this network is going to be exchanged. So where we see this industry go? From a vertical integration approach to an aggregator approach. Now, the bank more and more will aggregate and offer to their clients the best of breed of the fintech world, of the robot automation world that we listened before with Craig, and so on. We're going to assist to a fragmentation and bundling of all the services that internally the banks is supplying to their customer, and we will not be able to address this different world with a traditional trust approach, a linear point-to-point transaction approach, but this is going to be a sort of trust fabric, a trust net that has to be able to guarantee the security of this new, much more complex ecosystem. What is changing, in short, is that now, again, on the left side of the slide, you see we still, in order to guarantee security and transaction, trust in a transaction, we need to guarantee still the basic stuff in terms of security of connection, trust identification. What is making this much more difficult is that the counterparts are not just physical persons or legal entities as they used to be, but they're going to become more and more software agents. Software agents owned by different counterparts. It could be a fintech, it could be a RPA specialized company. Software agents that could be located in the cloud, it means in whatever jurisdictions. They are not physically identifiable anymore. In addition to this, we have new challenges that are coming from a non-linear relationship, but to a sort of mesh network of interaction between all those software agents. We have to deal with the different jurisdictions in which those software agents could be located, because me as a bank, I could be offering some services based on a fintech that is based in Silicon Valley or in India or in China, and this will make a difference. And last but not least, as we also have heard before from Craig, a lot of these new services are going to be based on artificial intelligence. And when we deal with artificial intelligence, everything becomes much more complex, because it's not just a software anymore. It's a software that has been developed by an engineer, has been trained by some other entity, based on some volume of data in order to extract some pattern and base the behavior of the network on that pattern. Basically, this means that the behavior of an artificial intelligence network is very hard, I would say almost impossible to predict nowadays. So it becomes extremely complex to define the liability model in case a decision is taken that is not the right decision, and will put the bank in a situation that they need to justify that decision. How InfoCert has been dealing with this change in paradigm, this change in work, with a solution that we have developed initially for the IoT world, the Internet of Things, because what we see happening within the banking sector is the same that is affecting the IoT world, if you want. Lots of transaction happening between software agents. Software agents that could interact with each other, but could even interact with people, with legal entity, and so on. So we need to be able, we have seen not in a linear traditional way, but more in a more meshed way. In order to address this much more complex environment, MID-PKI allows for issuing of digital certificates to any kind of counterpart. It could be a traditional physical person, it could be a legal entity, but it could even be a software component. So the first thing you have to deal with is you have to be able to properly identify whatever is your counterpart in a transaction in order to provide a clear accountability schema. Second, you need to guarantee the authenticity, confidentiality, and security of all exchange data. And this again is done with our PKI. All the data is traced, monitored, archived, and attributed with legal certainty to a specific owner. whatever type of ownership it is. And in this world where entities tend to be not physical as they used to be, and they can be very short-lived. I mean, a software agent could be created just for the time of a transaction. It could disappear 10 minutes later. It could be created in a jurisdiction or in another. So you need to have a framework, an infrastructure that is high flexible in order to deal with this additional complexity. It is to be able to create and destroy a new identity in your trusted network on the fly. Is to be able to identify where this identity has been created, where the transaction has been started, and in that regard, now InfoCert has several patents not to not only act as a trusted third party, but as well act as a location authority, so to give the certainty of not only of the identity, but of the location of the identity. And this is where we see this world going. Is going to be a very interesting evolution for the banking sector. We think that we are a step ahead of the market here, trying to address where the industry is going, and we will be happy not to hear what's the audience is asking now to the speakers today.
Thank you, Carmine. So thanks a lot for providing us an overview on what could be the role of a qualified trust service provider in this changing scenario. So now is the Q&A session. I would like to start with a question for Craig. Is about trust and identity in this context, where usually we was thinking about that the identity and the trust was always related to a physical persons, because we spoke about qualified signature, digital identity. But what is the real meaning of trust when there is in a RPA process or artificial intelligence? What we have, what's the need for trust? What we have to certify? The content of the software, the content of the algorithm, the dealing of the algorithm with someone else, the channel where the data go through. What's the need for trust on this scenario?
Yeah, so trust becomes, to use a big word, the art of triangulation, which means that you know, in the physical world, you had a human being to focus on, and you had aspects that you could validate that that human was who they said they were. But now there are the context of the human in terms of the transaction is very important. So you need to understand, you know, a stacked set of aspects about the human. Some may be biometrics, some may be presence-based, like two-factor authentication through mobile. Some may be by understanding GPS and location intelligence to understand that the person was actually in an area where the transaction took place and the time. So as you move into this world where electronic identity becomes more complicated, you need a whole set of metadata, if you will, about the individual, about the transaction, about the place. That's going to have to be all you know, put together in a way that is usable, that is unalterable, that is non-repudiated, and that's what a lot of I think the modern trust network companies are trying to get to.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Thanks a lot. Remaining on this topic, Carmine, I know that you are working on a lot of innovation that we are implementing on processes and solutions. What about PSD directive? that prescribe the adoption of QAC and QSIL. I know that these building blocks are going to certify and provide trust, but what are the difference between these two kind of trust blocks?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. The PSD2 directive prescribed the use of both QAC and QSIL. And just to explain make it very simple, QAC it's basically the same job as the SSL. They guarantee a secure channel in the communication and the identity of the counterpart. So what you get by adopting QAC are the same benefits of the SSL, but with a stronger legal framework. And those are confidentiality of all the data exchanged, integrity, so that data is not going to be modified, and authenticity of a counterpart. Of course, one counterpart, the one showing the QAC. If in a PSD2 transaction you want to prove the authenticity of both counterparts, what we suggest to our clients is to adopt two QACs, one for the server side and one for the client side, so you guarantee the maximum security of the transaction. And this could be okay if you want, unless you want to be able to store all the data exchanged in the transaction to be able to prove it later on, not for whatever purpose you may need. In case you need to keep the evidence and store it for a later usage, in that case, you are also going to need a QSIL, because what you get from a QSIL on top of what I just described for the QAC is that you can digitally sign the data exchanged, so you can associate with the legal value the data to a legal entity that was the owner and the creator of the data, and you can use that as an evidence in case later on you may need it. This is the additional benefit of the QSIL. Okay,
thank you, Carmine. Remain on you. We are seeing, even from the presentation from Craig, that the software is going to play more and more important role in the short terms. But let me say, why is more difficult provide and assuring trust on a software component comparing to trust that we have to provide for a physical person? What are the complexity and constraint that is more complex to manage?
Yeah, software is a very complex word. No, just not to provide you with a few examples. All of us are familiar with talking to Alexa or to whatever software agent is running on our smartphone. Well, what's happening in that case is that the software agents we are talking with, it's in the cloud. Means it could be located in whatever jurisdiction. And the reality is that this software agent could be moved in a different jurisdiction according to the type of answer or type of question it needs to answer to. So what is definitely more difficult for the software is its international nature. It could be located anywhere. It could be moved in real time from a jurisdiction to another in order to, let me say, manage the risk for the company that is using that software. So it is important to localize the software and to identify what's behind. Jurisdiction is key when it comes to trust, because trust has to relate to a legal framework that is tied to a specific jurisdiction. And this makes it much more difficult. If you want, the second thing that is making software extremely complex to manage is this trend that was clearly shown by Craig in artificial intelligence. Now, everything is being affected by artificial intelligence. It's everywhere. And the problem with artificial intelligence is that the behavior of an artificial intelligence component depends on two things: on the way it was built, on the neural network that was built by the software engineer, and on the training that the new network received. You know how AI works. You use neural networks to analyze large volumes of data, looking for patterns. And you use those patterns to define the behavior of the AI agent. So this means that the behavior of AI software agents will depend on how the network has been built, engineered, and which data has been used for the training. And the consequence of this is that even the engineer that designed the neural network cannot know, once that network has been trained, how it's going to behave and why it's behaving that way. The result of this is that AI is not, the behavior of AI is not deliberately designed, and this means that if we start to deploy software component based on AI to control a critical infrastructure or a medical device, like it's happening, we are trusting people's life in machines whose operations no one understands. And this is very much critical. And this is why it is extremely important to define a proper trust framework to identify a legal responsibility when things go wrong.
Thanks a lot, Carmine. So we have 5 minutes left. Let me have an opportunity for a last question for Craig. I take one of the questions from the attendees. So Craig, I would like to ask you about trust framework that Carmine was saying. There are two different approaches. Here in Europe, we have a European regulation, an ADAS regulation, that is a framework that defines exactly all the aspects of trust services, and the player as a QTSP are audited by the local supervisory body to provide this kind of service. Compared to this, there is a completely different approach from the common law countries like UK, US, where there is no regulatory framework, but they are more based on an audit framework that they provide you, and after it's up to you to use this audit framework as a proof of evidence about your digital transaction. So what's your view on these two big difference? What is going to happen, and if they are going to converge or not?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, really, because you have two things. You have the strength of our existing institutions and processes, the regulatory framework, and then you have advancing technology. And these are, in some ways, in a battle. So in the US, we don't have as strong a regulatory structure around identification that Europe does. So the advanced signature is adequate for most of the transactions that are done in the US. And there is a hope that advancing biometrics will ultimately provide the level of authentication and a lot of the trust that will happen. So in that environment, it's really betting the farm, as they say, on advancing technology to solve the problem of trust. Now, will the fraudsters and the bad behavior accelerate faster than the biometrics and others to protect it? No one really knows. But in Europe, the regulatory frameworks are much stronger. There's much more focus. There has been much more work. You have even a structure to call things directives versus regulations and so forth. We have similar problems. I mean, in the US, there's almost too many entities that are regulating banks. So it's unclear as to who is regulating what. They're conflicting and redundant data collections. It's not perfect. Here you have a little stronger structure. You still have some of those same problems, but you have a stronger regulatory framework. framework and discussion. So the idea of trust and certificates and so forth, makes sense, particularly as you get to smaller European countries that tend to be more homogeneous. Yeah, you can issue a certificate for a citizen in a country. If you tried to do that in the U.S., it would be difficult. Mm-hmm. So they're very different. It's going to be a battle between advancing analytics and the trust frameworks as they evolve. And ultimately, it'll be determined by, like everything, opportunities in the market, either from the commercial side, or great dangers or events that create a great need that didn't exist before. Interesting question.
Okay, thanks a lot, Craig. So we are going to conclude this session. Let me say, just to summarize, we have seen that the processes and business became more and more complex. Before, the governance was all internally, and there was only a human-to-human relation. Now the things are going complex, but it seems that the needs for trust is still there, and all of us, we need trust once we perform a digital transaction. So on this, as InfoCert, we are going to play our role and take our challenge in the future. So thanks to all. Thanks, Carmine, for providing us your vision and your view. Thanks, Clair, to join us attending this webinar, and thanks to all participants connected to the webinar. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye.
Good.